Canada has three branches of government. No, not the federal, provincial, municipal. That's the levels of government. The branches of government are the executive, legislative, and judicial. Do you remember what the role of the legislative branch is? That's right, to pass laws. Today we're going to talk about how laws are created. So let's review some aspects of our legislative branch at the national level. We have a bicameral legislature, which means there's two houses or chambers that work on creating laws. Canadians get to elect the members of the House of Commons or Parliament, so they're known as MPs. This is where most of the lawmaking originates. When we elect people to represent us in the House of Commons, they'll get a seat, but there isn't a specific seat. Instead, the representative will sit with the other members of their party. The party with the most seats gets to sit on the right-hand side of the Speaker of the House, and they're the governing party. Is this all sounding familiar? Now, there's also some organization to where the members of the party sit. The leader of the party sits in the front middle because he's the prime minister of the country. His cabinet sits around him. These are people that are all part of the executive branch as well as the legislative branch. The rest of the elected party members sit behind them, so they're known as backbenchers, and they're only part of the legislative branch. And of course, you already know that the second largest party is the official opposition and sits on the left-hand side, like a mirror image. The leader of that party sits in the middle at the front and is the leader of the opposition. She will also have a cabinet that sits around her, the shadow cabinet. Their job is to point out any flaws in the bills that the government's trying to get passed, or criticize what the government is doing with the laws. They are not part of the executive branch, though. They, along with any other MPs in the House of Commons from the other parties, are just part of the legislative branch. But saying just part of the legislative branch makes it sound like they don't do anything important. I think passing laws is very important. And if there's a minority government, which is when the governing party has less than 50% of the seats in the House of Commons, that means the people sitting on the left-hand side have a lot more power. Let me explain why. When someone wants to create a law, they usually will get the governing party to introduce it in the House of Commons as a bill. A bill is a document that outlines the proposed law. While other members in the House of Commons can introduce a bill, we call that a private member's bill. It usually doesn't get very far, because if the governing party supported it, they would have had their executive introduce the idea. In every party, there is an expectation of party solidarity. Remember, we talked about that. Behind closed doors, the members of the party can debate on what laws they want to propose. This meeting is called a caucus meeting, and it's closed to outsiders. The members of the party get to debate and discuss the issues in the caucus meeting, and they often disagree with each other, especially if the needs of their constituents are different. But once the party holds a vote and decides that that's the direction the party needs to go, all the members of the party must support it publicly, or they're going to get kicked out. Remember that example I gave about the GST in a previous video? Basically, the idea of party solidarity is once you're a member of the party, out in public, you need to be a team player. And in the House of Commons, there is no secret ballot. Every MP must stand up and say yay or nay to the passing of a bill, so everybody knows if you voted with the party or not. Because of party solidarity, if there's a majority government, they know they're always going to get the votes they need for passing the bills because they have more than 50% of the votes. But if they're a minority government, which means they're bigger than any other party, but not over 50%, the governing party is going to have to convince one of the other parties to vote with them so that they can get enough votes to get their bills passed. This means that the governing party is going to have to compromise a bit more. Many people see this as more democratic because the governing party is going to have to pay more attention to what minority groups want. Why do we call them minority groups? Well, if your ideology doesn't match the governing party, that means your ideas were attractive to a smaller group of people, hence you're a minority group. So this all is what keeps our government responsible. If the governing party has the majority government, it means it has the support from the majority of Canadians. If the governing party has a minority government, that means it doesn't have the support of the majority of Canadians and needs to compromise in order to be acceptable to everyone else. If the governing party doesn't compromise and ignores the wishes of the legislature, they have what's called a vote of non-confidence because the legislature no longer has the confidence of the executive branch to do what's right. And the governing party is going to have to step down then. In most cases, we'll have to hold another election to see if we can find a party that the majority of Canadians do support. We've had a lot of minority governments, like you can see on this chart here. Most of those governments only lasted a short time before a vote of non-confidence was held and another election had to be organized. So let's go through all the steps that have to be taken to get a bill passed. Of course, somebody has to think of the idea and write it down. Then the bill is introduced in the House of Commons. There's no debate this time, it's just a chance for everybody to get familiar with the proposed law. We call this the first reading. The second reading takes a lot more time because there's going to be debate, and then after there's going to be committees that are going to look at the bill and make sure it's constitutional. If there's any changes that need to be made, known as amendments, they need to be done at this stage. You can't make amendments at the end. That's when the final vote will be on whether or not it should become a law, called the third reading. It's different in the US. You can add amendments right at the last minute. So once they've made all their changes, we hold the third and final reading, but that's in the lower house. That's just the readings in the House of Commons. Then the bill has to go through the exact same process in the Senate. Remember, the Senate was created to be the sober second thought, the legislative group that's going to take one more look at a bill to make sure it really is in the best interest of Canadians. So the Senate has the first reading, second reading, debate, committee research, and the third reading. If the Senate decides there's serious problems that need to be amended, then the bill has to go back to the House of Commons and go through the process again. So now this bill has been debated, studied, and voted on 6 times. It is ready to become a law, but there's still one more step it has to take. The head of state must sign off to make it official. Because our head of state is the Queen and she doesn't have time to deal with all of this, the Governor General will sign it for her. This is called royal assent because they're saying that the Queen approves of the law. And remember, our unwritten Constitution says she will always give royal assent. Once this happens, the bill becomes an act of Parliament and part of our legal code. So you can see there are many issues and steps that are taken to ensure that Canadian law is as fair as it possibly can be.